Hi, Danielle. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone.
All right, we are going to jump right in. Thank you again for joining today. I am going to ask Kristen, can you do me a favor? Can I make you a co-host and you help me with the waiting room so I don't miss anybody? Awesome. Okay, I just want to make sure that I can pay attention to the slides and let people in at the same time. So thank you for that, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Laura Boyce. I'm the Pennsylvania Executive Director of Teach Plus. If you haven't already, we'd love to have you introduce yourself in the chat with your name, where you're joining from, and what's your connection to education. Are you a parent? Are you a teacher? Are you a taxpayer? We know that every single one of us in Pennsylvania has some reason to care about education, and we'd love to know what your reason is. I am really honored to be representing Teach Plus here today, as well as the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium, which I'll talk about in a moment. So first, Teach Plus is a national nonprofit, and our mission is to advance or to empower excellent, experienced, and diverse teachers to take leadership over key policy and practice issues that advance equity, opportunity, and student success. We have been in the Pennsylvania region since 2017, doing policy work since 2020, and have been in existence nationally since 2009. And welcome to those who are joining. We are across a number of different states, as you can see in the country. We have both instructional leadership programs that are based in schools, as well as a policy fellowship, including a few of our teachers who are on tonight. Hi, Kristen and Jennifer. And all of our teachers together, our theory of change is that if we empower teachers to develop the skills that they need to lead, that they can transform our educational system to be one that's defined by equity and opportunity for all. As I mentioned, I'm also proud to be representing the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium, who's co-producing tonight's event. And I see a number of folks, including Juliet Kersey and one of the co-directors here with us this evening as well. The Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium is a relatively new grassroots coalition made up of pre-K to 12 districts and educators, higher education, nonprofit, and government leaders. Our goal is to increase the number of teachers of color in Pennsylvania, as well as the number of culturally responsive and sustaining educators in Pennsylvania. And our website is on the screen. We encourage you to check us out and get involved if you have not already. Juliet, anything you want to add about PEDC before we keep on going?
No, but thank you, Laura, so much for facilitating tonight. I really appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure. So the purpose of tonight's event is for us to really think about how do we as Pennsylvanians, if everybody can make sure that they're muting as they come in, how do we as Pennsylvanians advocate at the state level during budget season around different educational equity issues? Whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, whether you are a citizen, what can you do to have an impact during this time when we know so many decisions are made at the legislative level that impact our classrooms, our teachers, and most importantly, our students. So before we go into how to make a difference, we want to talk about, well, what do we mean when we talk about educational equity? What are some of the issues that are equity related in the state of Pennsylvania? What does some of the data tell us? So the first area that I'd like to start off with, and in each of these, we're doing just not really a deep dive, just an introduction, and we have a lot of resources we'll share towards the end if you want to dive in more deeply in this area. So one area that both Teach Plus and PEDC are very concerned with is educator diversity and staffing shortages. You've probably seen, or maybe you haven't, the overwhelming body of research on the benefits of having teachers of color for all students, but particularly for students of color. Really, the research base at this point has become pretty overwhelming. It's one of, honestly, I'd say the strongest findings in educational research over the past 5 to 10 years is all of the benefits for students of color, from higher test scores to high school graduation rates, to college aspirations, a host of both academic and non-academic outcomes that are improved when they have teachers of color. And there's also good evidence that having teachers of color is beneficial for white students as well. Given that research is particularly dispiriting.
Hi, sorry.
If you can, everybody can make sure that they're muted. It's particularly dispiriting to see that in Pennsylvania, only 6% of our teachers are people of color compared to 36% of our students. That's one of the largest disparities in the country, and it continues to get worse over time. We see the percentage of teachers of color maybe very, very slightly inching up, while the percentage of students of color has risen much more rapidly. And in particular, our population of Hispanic and Latino students continues to grow, as well as our newcomer students. On top of that educator of color shortage, we also have a more general educator shortage that you've probably read about or seen headlines about, or listened to school board meetings about over the past several, well, really particularly the past 2 years. This is actually has been a building problem over the course of a decade. The supply of teachers in Pennsylvania over the course of the past decade has declined by 2/3. And so when we look at that, that has devastating consequences on our future workforce and our students if we do not find a way to get more teachers entering the educational workforce. We have, on top of that, during the pandemic, seen an accelerated sort of case of departures from the profession. A recent poll found that 55% of teachers plan to leave the profession earlier than they originally planned. 90% feel that burnout is a serious problem. There's some emerging data that the public as a whole is really concerned about this as well. Just for one example, in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, the talent department recently reported that teacher resignations are up 200% this year compared to last. And across the state, PASBO, the School Business Officials Association, along with PASA, the School Superintendent Association, found that staffing is the top concern of district leaders across the state. So here are just a few visuals to supplement this, the statistics that I just read to you. This is a map from Research for Action showing all of the school districts around the state based on how many teachers of color they have. The bright red is districts with no teachers of color. That's 37% of all districts in Pennsylvania that have 0 teachers of color. And as you can see, most of the other ones have 0 to 5% teachers of color. We really only have a very small handful of districts, such as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, some of the other urban cores, where there is more than 10% teachers of color. And even in those areas, the teaching force is not at all representative of the student bodies. Research for Action also found that 50% of all schools have 0 teachers of color. So this is really a drastic situation. And some people might say, well, that might be in areas where there are no students of color, but that is not the case. These are, as I mentioned, 36% of our student body across the state is students of color compared to 6% of educators. So in many of these districts, there are huge disparities. Just as one example, we've got Kristen here from the School District of Lancaster. The School District of Lancaster is 90% students of color and 90% white teachers. So it's almost a reverse, the teaching force in terms of diversity compared to the student body. Here are just a small selection of headlines highlighting how widespread this staffing shortage that we're seeing in Pennsylvania and across the country is. So that's one issue. Let's talk about another issue. Another major equity issue that Teach Plus works on is education funding. And here I'm talking about K-12 education funding, although we're also going to talk about early childhood funding in a bit. And our higher education system also is pretty underfunded. We won't get into that tonight. Pennsylvania ranks 45th in the country in the state share of K-12 education funding. What that means is out of all of the money that's spent in schools, which is a combination of local funding, state funding, and federal funding, we are almost at the very bottom in terms of the share of that is state funding. As a result, more of our overall funding is local funding, which leads to some of the largest disparities in the country because you have, some areas with higher wealth, specifically higher property wealth, who are able to raise a lot more money, even at lower property tax rates than less wealthy districts. And the state, because it's not putting in as much of the overall share, is not making up those local disparities. And so we just have these huge disparities from district to district. One commonly cited example is Overbrook High School and Lower Marion High School, which are, very close within walking distance of each other, but because they're across district lines and because their districts have very different property tax bases, the amount of school funding is drastically different. There's been a lot of attention to this because of the school funding lawsuit that just had its closing arguments. One of the studies that was conducted for that lawsuit found that our system is underfunded by at least $4.6 billion. And that on top of that, each district's mandated cost, meaning the cost that they don't really have any discretion over, it's required by law for them to pay, including charter schools, special education, and pensions, those are rising much faster than the rate of state funding is increasing, meaning that districts are either having to continuously raise property taxes or make increasingly drastic cuts to their educational programming in order to balance their budgets. The wealthiest school districts in the state spend $4,800 more per student per year than the poorest districts. And that's on top of what we know that the poorest school districts, and specifically students living in poverty, actually need more resources in order to be successful. And instead of giving the students who need the most resources, we give the students who need the most the least based on where they live. This is also a racial equity issue because the 100 most underfunded school districts, which make up the bottom 20% of all districts in the state, represent over half of Pennsylvania's Black students, over half of Pennsylvania's Hispanic students, over half of Pennsylvania's students experiencing poverty, and over half of Pennsylvania's English language learners. So a lot of our most vulnerable students are concentrated in these districts that are the very most underfunded. Those are the so-called level up districts that we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. And one thing that's been really distressing to see during the school funding trial is that some of our state lawmakers who are defendants in the trial via their lawyers have blamed students and parents in underfunded districts for achieving inferior outcomes rather than fixing the broken system. They've said, well, if there are different outcomes, it's because students in poorer districts are less industrious. That one lawyer even said, what use does a kid on the McDonald's track have for algebra or chemistry? So really distressing comments that reveal some of the bias and some of the assumptions about some of our students, particularly students of color, that is leading to this, very inequitable system. This is a map that shows the districts that are underfunded by more than $4,000 per student. Those are the bright red districts. And you can see there might be some areas of the state that you recognize, but one thing that strikes me about this map is this is not, as many people think, just a Philadelphia problem. And it's not just an urban problem. There are some very rural districts as well as some suburban districts, for example, Upper Darby and William Penn School District in the Southeast, that are also extremely underfunded. Okay, I know we're moving fast through a lot of issues. The last one we're going to talk about tonight is early childhood education. And this is definitely a major equity issue that is often not considered by education advocates. And I'm hoping that is going to change. So as one of our fellows who's on tonight just reminded Senator Lindsey Williams in a meeting this afternoon that we had, 85% of brain development occurs before students enter kindergarten. And we see many lifelong achievement gaps start before students even enter kindergarten. So when we start having conversations about educational equity, when students start kindergarten, we're already 5 years at least 5 years too late in terms of the services and the supports we could put in place to actually level the playing field. We also, speaking of very convincing educational research, know that high quality early childhood programs are one of the best investments a government can make. Various research has found anywhere from a $4 to $9 return on investment for every dollar spent on early childhood. The reason for that is because it's been found to improve not only early performance, such as learning the alphabet, social regulation, all of those benefits that we want to see by kindergarten, but it also increases high school graduation rates. It reduces teenage pregnancy rates. It reduces future likelihood to commit crimes. It increases lifelong earnings. And so this is something that by investing in, we're increasing our future tax base, we're reducing our future costs on crime prevention or incarceration. And it really just makes sense also as a stimulus to the economy in terms of the workforce. We know, and I know many of us have experienced during the pandemic, that when people, particularly women, don't have high quality childcare to rely on, that stops them from fully participating in the workforce, and that has ripple effects throughout our economy as well. So by underinvesting in our childcare and pre-K systems, we're also keeping a lot of potential mothers out of the workforce because they don't have an affordable option to help support their children. There is a program called Child Care Works that helps to subsidize the cost of childcare. However, about 81% of eligible children are unserved by the program. It's a combination of there not being enough funding to fund slots for everyone, as well as a lot of families not knowing about the program. And again, that limits parents' ability to participate in the workforce. And we're also facing an extreme early childhood educator shortage. A lot of that has to do with the pay. So the average childcare worker in Pennsylvania earns less than $10 an hour, which is poverty wages. There are a higher percentage of early childhood educators living in poverty than the statewide average. And half of childcare workers rely on one or more public assistance programs, which when you think about it is just criminal, right? The people who we're entrusting our children with, who are responsible for them during that time of the most brain development they have in their entire lives, are making less than oftentimes they could make at Starbucks, at Best Buy, at Amazon. Many are working 2 or 3 jobs in order to pay their bills, and oftentimes are needing government assistance in order to do that. These are some statistics from our partners at Start Strong PA and Pre-K for PA, which are the statewide coalitions for childcare and early child and pre-K. It just sort of shows again the percentage of students who are unserved, or children, I should say, who are unserved. 81% of children under 5 are unserved by Child Care Works, and 85% of infants and toddlers. Similarly, with publicly funded pre-K, 64% of eligible children do not have access. So we do have these really strong programs in Pennsylvania, but they are not funded anywhere near what we would call a universal level to say we have universal childcare or universal pre-K. As I mentioned, childcare teachers on average are earning about $10 an hour, less than Target cashiers and Amazon warehouse workers, and the early childhood educator poverty rate is 18%. Okay, I've just given you a lot of very concerning data. Hopefully you're feeling really concerned, really fired up and thinking, what can I do to change this? Why aren't all my legislators talking about this? Why aren't all my friends talking about this? Why isn't every single person in Pennsylvania losing sleep over this? Hopefully that is the case. And we want to be able to share some resources with you tonight that will feel like things that you can immediately put into practice. So before we go into some advocacy strategies, it's important to understand a little bit about the Pennsylvania budget process, which has already started and will be going for the next several months. And this is a really key time of the year to have influence and to talk to your legislators because they're making some really key decisions. So a little bit about the timeline for the state budget process. Governor Wolf and every governor in Pennsylvania makes a budget address, which contains their proposal for the following fiscal year's budget in early February. And so it was on February 8th this year. It's the first Tuesday after the first Monday of each February. After the governor's proposal, that's just a proposal. It pretty much never ends up getting passed exactly as written. It's just a starting point for negotiations. The next step is that the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, which are the ones that are responsible for appropriating the money in the budget, have hearings with every department of Governor Wolf's administration. So they have each of those houses, the House and the Senate, has a hearing with the Department of Education to talk about the education budget. They have a hearing, with the Department of Health and Human Services. Every single different department, those take place throughout the month of March. And that's usually an opportunity to start getting a sense of where different legislators fall and how they feel about the budget and what their concerns are. From there, we're now past most of those hearings and into the stage of budget negotiations. So throughout the month of April, May, and June, the legislature is having some public and some behind the scenes negotiations. Some of the really key players in those negotiations are Governor Wolf and his staff, the leadership of the House and the Senate, and in particular, the leadership of the Appropriations Committee. So that would be in the Senate, Senator Pat Brown for the Republican Party, Senator Vincent Hughes for the Democratic Party. In the House, that would be Representative Stan Saylor for the Republicans and Representative Matt Bradford for the Democrats, as well as all of the other sort of like key leaders that you've heard about, such as President Pro Tem Jake Corman, House Speaker Brian Cutler, and some of those others in leadership. So this year we have a particular opportunity as advocates because we have an above expected revenue in terms of tax revenue, and we still have a lot of leftover federal stimulus funds in the state's rainy day fund. So those things together have added up to a historic budget surplus of several $billions. There's some debate between the Democrats and the Republicans in the General Assembly as to how big that surplus is, but it's certainly several $1 billion and allows for potentially a larger budget than we've seen, and particularly a larger budget around education, which has been Governor Wolf's signature issue. So what is in Governor Wolf's proposal? He has proposed, again, a historic budget that, if passed as is, would be almost a 75% increase from what it has been in previous years. The major components are $1.25 billion. This is all increases. So this is not total funding. This is how much he's proposing to increase compared to the previous year. So a $1.25 billion increase in basic education funding, which goes to all 500 districts to help them. They can spend those on any of their costs, whether that's mandated costs or things like reducing class sizes, hiring additional teachers. No real restrictions on those funds. He's also proposed $300 million for the 100 most underfunded districts, which we call the Level Up districts. This was a new program that was passed last year, and Teach Plus is very proud to have been part of the coalition that advocated for this as part of last year's budget. Last year, $100 million was passed. This is in recognition of the particular needs of some of those districts that are the most underfunded. Those would be your Reddings, your Philadelphias, your Scrantons, your Eries, that are so far from adequacy that incremental increases in the total funding to all 500 districts is just not going to catch kids up within my lifetime. It's going to take, decades and decades to get them close to adequacy unless we have something specific to target them. He's also included $200 million in additional special education funding, which is really important because special education is one of the areas where the cost of special ed for districts has gone up way faster than the state education funding has increased for special education. He's additionally asked for $70 million more to expand publicly funded pre-K programs. That is pre-K Counts and the Head Start supplemental program in Pennsylvania. He's proposed flat funding childcare, which is a disappointment to the childcare advocacy community and something we'd like to see, improve before the budget is passed. That would be the third straight year of flat funding for childcare. A couple of other notable things related to the teacher shortages and how we address kind of elevating the profession of teaching is he's proposed to raise the minimum teacher salary to $45,000. In most places, it's already above that, but there are a few parts of the state where that would be lead to a raise for teachers. And he's proposed a scholarship program, the Nellie Bly Scholarship, to PASHE schools and community colleges to help to, allow more people to attend those schools. And there's a focus on high need occupations like teaching. A couple of other important bills and proposals to be aware of during this budget season. These are not part of the governor's proposal, but as I said, his proposal is a starting point. So these are all things that could end up being put past either as standalone bills or as part of the final budget package, which includes something called the school code, where a lot of sort of education related bills kind of get worked in unofficially or through the negotiations process. So one bill that Teach Plus is really proud to have worked on is Senate Bill 99, which is sponsored by Senator Vincent Hughes and Senator Ryan Aument, one Democrat, one Republican. That's a bill that's focused on diversifying the educator workforce, specifically through creating additional youth pathways into teaching and a grant program for education prep programs to recruit a more diverse teacher workforce. That bill is currently stalled in the Senate. We are working to try to revive it, and I'll share with you some ways to try and help raise awareness about it as well. It's also about to be introduced in the House as a separate companion bill, and we're hopeful that it might have a chance of moving forward in the House as well, or instead of in the Senate. There's a couple of other bills, Senate Bill 224 and Senate Bill 165, that are both focused on reducing barriers to certification for teachers. SB 224 is focused on reciprocity for teachers from out of state, being able to get certified more easily. SB 165 allows DACA recipients and other non-citizens to become teachers. Many people don't know that our current law in Pennsylvania does not allow for non-citizens to become teachers in almost every circumstance, which, you know, in addition to just being an injustice, is also, particularly in this age of educator shortages, just shooting ourselves in the foot. You know, we don't have enough teachers, and then we're saying certain groups of students who we do educate in K to 12, we've already invested in, well, you can't become a teacher, you can't become a part of, you know, our society that's going to really be helping us to improve the next generation. Representative Mike Schlossberg from Allentown introduced a bill recently for Grow Your Own grant programs. Grow Your Own programs are programs that are focused on populations within a particular district or area. Some of them focus on high school students, some focus on paraprofessionals, some focus on other community members such as parents or you know, other district staff, and work to help them to become teachers, with the idea that, you know, many of them are already connected within their communities. They're likely to stay, and they, you know, bring a level of cultural proficiency and knowledge of that particular context, but oftentimes don't have the resources or face more barriers to enter the profession. There are two bills, HB 2247 and HB 2389, that would provide scholarships and loan forgiveness for educators. We know the cost of college is a huge barrier for a lot of people experiencing poverty to enter kind of the middle class in general, but particularly for teaching, which is a relatively low paid profession, it really doesn't make sense for a lot of people who don't have much wealth or resources to accrue a lot of student loan debt to then go into a profession where they make less than they could in most other professions that require a bachelor or master's degree. So we think scholarships and loan forgiveness could be a major common sense way to attract more people to the profession. The Senate and House Democrats, before Governor Wolf's proposal, put forward an even bigger proposal for education, $2.75 billion, and they included $250 million in there for staff shortages, which we were really excited to see. So we're hopeful that some of that might get translated into the budget, even going beyond what Governor Wolf asked for. And as I mentioned before, the Start Strong PA campaign, which is the statewide early childhood, specifically childcare campaign, is also proposing an additional $115 million for early childhood educator staff wage supplement to be able to bring up some of those wages that I mentioned at the beginning are around $10 an hour for childcare workers, which we know is just inhumane, but also is just crippling our childcare centers' ability to stay staffed. Okay, so how can I get involved? I am going to drop into the chat a resource for you. And this is kind of a landing page with a lot of different materials that you will be able to refer to during this session, but I also encourage you to, you know, bookmark it or save it and refer back to it. Can I just see it? Can I get a thumbs up to make sure that people are able to access it? Perfect. Okay. So we're going to talk about a few different strategies, and I encourage you to follow along in this document as I go, and also to click around as you're taking a look. So we're going to talk about a few different strategies and some sub-strategies within each of these. So the first way you can get involved is by pressuring your legislators directly. And these are in order of impact, but also effort. And so if you feel intimidated by the ones at the bottom, you can start at the top. They're easier, they take less time. They might be a little less impactful, but they still make a difference. So one thing you can do is you can participate in targeted email campaigns. These are things you've probably done before. I'm going to drop 2 examples in the chat where you click on a link, you fill in your address, and then you are connected with your legislators to send kind of a form email about an issue that you care about. So I've put into the chat 2 example campaigns. One that Teach Plus is sponsoring. It's going on right now. We'd love to send a flurry of emails right here tonight to your Pennsylvania representative and senator, asking them to save the Educator pipeline. And it has a short little email about all of the different things they could do this budget season to invest in the Educator pipeline. The second one is from our partners at the PA Schools Work campaign, which Teach Plus is a member of. That's the campaign that's working on K-12 school funding. And that is asking for legislators to invest in increased K-12 funding this school year. So that's one way, is you can send a targeted email. It's a form letter, but it still helps when legislators hear from their constituents, even as a form letter. It tells them this is something that I care about. And if they get at least 10 to 20 form emails about the same issue, that's something that many legislators really take notice of. You can also tweet at your legislators. In the resource document, you'll see a link where you can get a little bit more direction about how you can find somebody to tweet at. A lot of us might not be on Twitter, but in terms of the political world, Twitter is probably the social media that the most legislators and their staffers pay attention to. Even better, you can write a personalized email or letter, even if it's short, even if it's just a few sentences long. That can really be impactful and can show that you're passionate about an issue. We've got some tips within that document about how to do that, and some templates or some pointers for how to do it, as well as how you can find the contact information for your legislators. Even better than that, and sometimes a little faster, is calling the office. And when you call your legislator's office, you're usually going to talk to a staffer. You usually won't talk to the representative or senator themselves. But again, they keep track of how many people are calling about different issues, and you can just call really quickly and say, I'm calling because I am one of your constituents, and I'm really concerned about educator shortages. This is why, and this is what I'd like the senator or representative to do. Even more impactful is you can request to actually have a meeting with your House of Representative, with your representative or your senator. You can do that by calling up to their office and saying, I'd like to schedule a meeting. You can send an email requesting a meeting. You can go to their offices and ask for a meeting. That's often the most effective way. And all of your representatives have both an in-district office as well as an office in Harrisburg. And so the last option is to actually visit them in Harrisburg and go to their office there to speak with them. And even if you don't have an appointment, you can go to your legislator's office in Harrisburg and say, I'd like to speak with a staffer about my concerns. Okay, the next category of advocacy is you can join or support organizations and coalitions that are fighting for equity. In the handout, I've listed a number of different organizations that are working on the different topics that we talked about tonight. So for teacher diversity and pipeline, obviously, PEDC, the Educator Diversity Consortium, as well as Teach Plus, we're working together on this issue. The Center for Black Educator Development is another Philadelphia-based organization that has been doing excellent work around recruiting more students of color into the profession. And if you go to PEDC's website, you'll see a lot more organizations that are a part of that coalition that are working on teacher diversity in the pipeline. This is not at all an exclusive list, and there are a lot more, including many of you and the organizations you represent. For school funding, PA Schools Work is the large coalition of a lot of different advocacy organizations working on school funding. Education Voters Pennsylvania is another really great one, and you'll see in the document a lot of the resources came from them. They do really great work around mobilizing the community and mobilizing voters around education as a key issue. And Teach Plus also works there. And then for early childhood education, the two campaigns that I mentioned, Start Strong PA and Pre-K for PA, put out a lot of great content. So if you're interested in any of those, there are links within the document to their websites and how you can kind of connect, sign up for their email lists and get involved. Oops, I think I skipped one. There we go. If you are an educator, I'd also like to encourage you to apply for the Teach Plus Pennsylvania Policy Fellowship. We have some of our policy fellows here tonight. This is a year-long experience where you can learn how to become a policy advocate. You learn about different issues like the one that we talked about tonight, and all of the types of strategies we're talking about in terms of advocacy. We just go a lot deeper and really connect teachers with the people who are making decisions in Harrisburg. We are accepting applications for next year's cohort right now through May 2nd. And so we'd love to have you apply if you're interested. And I don't have the link for that handy, so I will find that before the end of tonight and make sure I drop it in. Okay, the last thing I want to share before we go into questions is a little bit about how do you craft your story when you are reaching out to a legislator. Oh, I think I actually skipped one other thing as well. Sorry, I'm working on just one screen. Okay, yes, I skipped the educating and mobilizing other strategies. So let me come back to that really quickly. And I'm going to drop a couple of resources in here as well in just a second. So in addition to you calling your legislators, as I mentioned, it's much more powerful when a legislator hears from a lot of people about an issue. So another way you can have an impact in addition to your own direct outreach is getting your friends, your family, other people within your district or across the state to also reach out to their legislators. And so there's a few different ways you can raise awareness. You can write a letter to the editor or an op-ed in your local newspaper. And so there's some strategies and some resources in the document about how to do that, including some best practices and some examples from some of our teachers of effective op-eds and letters to the editor. Another great way is to post and share different ways to engage on social media. And I'm making it very easy for you. What I'm dropping into the chat here are two social media campaigns that our Teach Plus teachers have developed. One is around equitable school funding and one is around the teacher pipeline. And this has great content and graphics that can be shared. It's literally just, copy and paste. And it's something that can be very easily shared on your social media. Our early childhood education working group is also doing great content. And so if you follow Teach Plus PA on any of our different social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you could also just reshare our content as it's posted. It's really easy to engage in that way. And it makes a big difference when people are sharing that content. And it's a great way to spread things such as the email campaigns. You can also do something like organizing a house party and having people come over to your house to learn more about an issue. And then let's say all write an email or write a letter to their legislators. That's a way to sort of mobilize and get people involved in community and activism at the same time. You can do a letter writing campaign along similar lines, start a petition or some other group action. And another thing you can do is participate in or organize rallies and press conferences around different topics. So some of you might have joined one of the rallies that was held last week in recognition of the end of the funding lawsuit. There were vigils held all over Pennsylvania, organized by Children First and Education Voters of Pennsylvania. As I said, there's a lot of resources within the documents for each of these different strategies. Okay. Last thing I want to share before we move into questions is just some tips around crafting your story. So whether this is writing an op-ed, whether you're writing an email to a legislator, whether you're having a face-to-face meeting, we find that storytelling is the most effective way to communicate, more so even than sharing statistics. Sharing stories, our brains are wired to remember stories, to connect emotionally with stories. And oftentimes a personal story can be the thing that makes a legislator change their position or really consider an issue. So I'm going to really quickly share with you some laws of storytelling that we use with our Teach Plus fellows that I hope you'll find useful as well. The first law is stories are about people. So the more specific that you can make it, if you're telling a story as a teacher about one of your students, you might change the name of the student for the sake of privacy, but the more you can make it really feel personal and help the audience really envision who the story is about and feel like they know that person, that really makes a difference. Second, the people in your story have to want something. So think about what are the goals of the people in the story. For anybody who is a literature teacher, you've heard about, the different story elements, and one of the first story elements after your characters is their motivation. What is it that they want, that they're trying to get over the course of the story? So in any good story, you want to make it clear what people's motivation is, what they want. Third, stories need to be fixed in time and place. What's the setting of the story? How can you help us to understand where and when it took place? The more you can let characters speak for themselves and include, actual dialogue and make it sound almost like you're listening to a movie, the more vivid it will be for others. Also, audiences bore easily, so don't include too many details, because often in a meeting with a legislator, you might have, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And so you want to be very concise with your stories, so you also have some time for questions. Stories speak the audience's language. As educators, and I know we're not all educators in the room, but we have a tendency to speak in jargon, to use a lot of acronyms, whether it's PSSAs or IEPs or 504s. We need to make sure that we remember that policymakers and the general public who we might be trying to mobilize do not know as much about some of these topics as we do. And we want to keep it simple, avoid jargon that's going to turn people off or make them tune out. We want to stir up emotions. The more of a laugh or a cry you can generate from the story, the more it's going to be memorable and make a difference. Stories don't tell, they show. So think about how you can share your theme without banging someone over the head with it. Stories have at least one moment of truth, and stories have clear meaning. You want your story to have really clear implications on what you're about to ask this legislator for. So one more law from us is using memorable details. I know that this is a very quick run through, but I hope that is helpful in terms of thinking about how you might craft an op-ed or how you might craft a conversation with legislators. And it often feels awkward to just jump into a story, but if you push through that discomfort, it really can be powerful to say, I'm really passionate about the issue of teacher diversity, and to show you why, I'd love to just share a story from when I was young. And then you go straight into the story, and it's not as awkward as you think it might be, I promise. Yes, Chris, 3 to 5 minute stories to tell legislators. That's exactly the length that we often try to keep our stories to as well. A couple of additional key takeaways. These are some principles from our friends at Words That Win, who do trainings around the race class narrative, which I won't get into. That could be a whole nother training. But some of their key takeaways is when we're speaking with others or we're crafting messaging, we want to start with leading with shared values, focusing on what everyone agrees with and what it is that we're trying to accomplish with whatever our policy is. So that might sound like, no matter our race, income, or location, we all believe that every child deserves the opportunity to succeed. We're bringing ourselves together with these shared values. Second, you want to offer the outcome or the vision for where you're trying to go, rather than just talking about the problem that you want to address. What are you actually trying to achieve? What's your vision for a more equitable society? And finally, we want to tell our story, not theirs. We often kind of go into defense mode and spend so much time rebutting things and saying, well, I want to tell you why critical race theory isn't really being taught in schools, and that's a dog whistle. Instead of saying, I want to talk to you about why culturally responsive schools are so important and why it's really important for every student, regardless of their race, to feel affirmed and to see their history taught in schools. Instead of, sort of going over to the other side's turf, we want to tell our own story. One last tip, we talked with our teachers about the idea of giving legislators or giving the public the brownie and not the recipe. As advocates, we often want to go into the details and we want to say, you know, we want to see $70 million for this, and we need to see this regulation changed, and here's this piece of the bill that we like. That's the recipe. The brownie is the overall product and the end goal we're trying to achieve. So instead of saying it's really important for us to raise the minimum wage to $15, selling the brownie would be saying every family deserves to be able to have one job that can provide for the needs of their family. So we're not going into the recipe. We're talking about why the minimum wage is important and what kind of a life that's going to lead to. Okay. The last quote before we move into questions. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Each of us, it can be easy to feel unimportant, powerless, like our voice doesn't matter, but particularly collectively, but even individually, we really do have a lot of power if we choose to leverage it and if we choose to take the time to really step into our power. And so I hope you're feeling energized to do so. And at this time, I'd love to take some questions. I know that there's been a lot of comments in the chat, so I'm going to do some scrolling through that, but please, in the meantime, feel free to put any additional questions in the chat or to raise a virtual hand, and we will try to get these questions answered. So far, I'm through the part of the chat where everyone introduced themselves. Yes, I will share these slides for reference. I'll share those out with everybody. I see a couple of requests for the PowerPoint. We'll share the recording as well. Okay, it looks like it's mostly comments in the chat so far. So let's see if any other questions come across. It seems impossible that no one has any questions.
I have a question. I was trying to find the raise hand button.
Go for it, Chris.
First, just thank you so much for the really concise and effective presentation on all the different issues that are going on that we're facing, and also on some really clear strategies for us to use. And I love the suggestions about sharing the PowerPoint and the presentation to our community partners. I was wondering, and I may have missed this, but I was wondering if there might be some organized visit to the State House, right, where we go in and obviously all this is organized, and we go in and have a planned pitch, right, across all of our different legislators, from this group. So I was just wondering if that's something that that you all might organize, or if if someone else is organizing. I just think it'd be really nice to be able to. Certainly, we can talk to our legislators here, some of whom are our neighbors, but beyond that, talking to other key legislators in PA would be, I think, pretty effective as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So I saw that Miriam mentioned a lot of different groups do sponsor those Capital Days or Advocacy Days. PACD, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Colleges and Teacher Educators, a lot of professors at education schools, they have one planned for April 12th. Teach Plus is working, we're doing one on April 13th and one on May 24th. Right now, we are just planning on opening that up to the teachers who are a part of our fellowship, but that's definitely something that we could consider potentially opening up to a larger audience. And I think, Juliet, we might also want to think about if that's something we want to organize as PEDC. Chris, I'd love to know, I know you introduced yourself, but how'd you hear about this and what's your affiliation? And I might be able to also point you to some other orgs that would be a good fit.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm a department chair of Education and Human Services at Lehigh University's in our College of Education. I recognize names on this group, and I don't exactly know how I got the email, but I'm glad I did. This is something that we train our students to do, so I can envision organizing a day where we're pitching some things that we're really passionate about as a faculty, and then also including our students and maybe some community members, maybe training up some folks, maybe learning from folks, and then having the conversations with legislators. But I was wondering if this was something that the group was already kind of organizing.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that'd be so powerful to have your students come. It sounds like maybe the teacher education day on the Hill might be a good fit for your group, but I'd also be happy to connect with you. Some of this we're learning as we go as well. And I know there's others on the call who have, even longer experience in terms of organizing these types of events and days, who might have things to chime in or to contribute, but we're happy to share resources if you're trying to organize your own. I'm figuring that out as I go, but have a few tips to offer at this point. Do we have other meeting dates to share with others? Damaris, do you mean in terms of other dates for kind of presentations like this?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
We don't have any other dates already set, but we can definitely share out this recording. And if this is something that you feel like would be beneficial to offer again, I'd love to get that feedback, and we'll think about, how we might be able to do that. It's really helpful to hear from folks if they found that useful and would like to have the opportunity to invite others.
Thank you.
Sure. And thanks, Juliet, for sharing your information in the chat for those who are interested in the Teacher Education Day through PACD. All right, well, if there are no other questions, what I would encourage you to do, since we are ending a little bit early, is to use this remaining time that you already had blocked off on your calendar to really explore the resources that we shared. Fill out the different targeted email campaigns, post a few social media posts using the graphics, send an email to your legislator, or make a plan for how you might otherwise get involved and mobilize your community. And it looks like Kristen has her hand up, so we'll give her the last word.
Well, I know Laura did an amazing job on the presentation. I'm reading through the chats. But as a member of Teach Plus currently, as a Teach Plus fellow, I just want to say that this is an organization that gives educators the tools to really make effective policy change. So if you're a teacher and you're interested, or someone in your district who you think would, be a powerful member of this group. I mean, this organization truly has the power to make effective change. And it's a collective group of educators from all over the state. And we just had our retreat this past weekend. And I'm feeling so encouraged, so hopeful. So please support this organization in any way you can.
Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate that. That means a lot. Make sure before you hop off, you see that Shirley noted that Children First is planning a youth advocacy day on Saturday, April 23rd. That's really a great resource. I'll try to collect these resources that have been shared in the chat as well to send along with the slides and the recording and the resource page one more time. So if there are no further questions, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to learn with us. We are more powerful together, and we're looking forward to staying connected and to continuing to work towards educational equity as a collective across Pennsylvania. Have a wonderful night.